Baruch Hashem, spirits are high here in Israel right now. We've just dealt a crushing blow to one of our greatest enemies. And there's a lot to be proud of in what the nation as a whole has accomplished, and especially what the Army and Air Force have accomplished in a tremendous success on the battlefield, in the air, and on the ground, in a way that really, I think it can be argued, has made a tremendous material difference to the long-term security of the country. And we have to thank Hakadosh Baruch Hu for that success, and we also have to thank the many members of the society who worked so hard and risked so much and showed such excellence in their performance during a critical time. And with that all being said, I think that there's more to get into in the question from the standpoint of Torah of exactly how we handle thinking about this question of what part of what our acknowledgement is in the situation should go to acknowledging, let's say, the might of Medinat Yisrael or its tremendous technical prowess and craftiness and all the material things that contributed to its success in battle, and what part should go to thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu and saying this was a miraculous event. No one could have expected us to be as successful as this. We have to sing praises. We have to give thanks. We have to remember that all of our success comes from Hashem, and be conscious of the fact that that success is going to be based on our maintaining, as a nation, a proper relationship with our Creator, right? So those two different ways of talking find themselves to be somewhat in tension, because it seems like the moment you start talking about the details of how we did it and how it worked and all the amazing feats from Mossad and from the Air Force, etc., with this surprise attack or that coordinated strike on Iranian generals, or this feint or that bluff or that ability to fool the enemy and hit them harder than they expected, etc., bring the whole thing crashing down, right? The more you start talking in those terms, one develops an infatuation with one's own capacity. And of course, we know from the standpoint of Tanakh that that's considered to be a bad kind of attitude to have, right? We don't want to say all this success came from my hands. We want to say it's from Hashem. And on the other hand, it's too simple to just walk around saying it's all from Hashem, it's all from Hashem all the time, seemingly, because people who risk and people who excel and people who show bravery and who show strength and who succeed in fighting for the hosts of Hashem, they too deserve to be acknowledged for their effort, right? So, like, it's one thing when you're trying to be self-deprecating and say, well, I didn't do anything, it's all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when someone else saves your life and you say to them, you didn't do anything, it was all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that can't be the right attitude to have either, right? There needs to be real acknowledgement of the accomplishments of the people to whom we owe gratitude. And we have to find some way of balancing these things. And I think that's especially, a serious consideration because it has to do more broadly with the kind of society that we're a part of and that we're building, right? Because you could say, well, it's true that, we can defend ourselves with fighter jets and tanks and everything else. And if we choose that means, then we have to excel on those terms. But someone with tremendous emunah could always speculate, well, but maybe if we didn't concern ourselves with those things so much, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu would step in and make up the difference if we had the right behavior and the right attitude in other respects, right? So if we didn't have fighter jets, but we had perfected our Avodat Hashem, who knows, maybe the rest of the world would become so consumed with its problems that no one could pose a threat to us, right? There's that kind of thinking that sometimes people put forward. And then someone else might argue against that and say, no, how does Hashem save you? Hashem saves you with the practical means that you use to try to save yourself by making you successful, right? So maybe he stacks the deck in your favor a little bit, but you shouldn't think that you shouldn't be trying to discover cures to diseases because Hashem can just save you from disease if you deserve it. He'll make you successful in discovering those cures if you deserve it, right? So there are different kinds of perspectives that you can draw out in this sort of a discussion. But I think maybe an interesting starting point that struck me during the last few weeks, uh, spending a good part of the time sheltering with family during ballistic missile barrages on our country that very sadly and unacceptably were lethal many times over the course of that period, right? There's, especially in the population centers where there were apartment complexes that were hit, you have multiple casualties, and it's terrible and it's horrific. And we shouldn't uh, forget that while being so pleased overall with the relative success and effectiveness of his military campaign. But in any case, when you're sitting in a condition where there's, fiery explosions raining down from the sky on your land, and you're praying to Hashem to keep all of Am Yisrael safe, and you understand at some level that it's going to be, it would take a miracle in a sense in that condition for no one at all to get hurt anywhere, but still you hope and you pray for that. I couldn't help also thinking to myself a bit about how if we look in the Torah and look at its prophetic insight, the society that is destroyed with the rain of fire from the sky is Sodom, the paradigmatic, most wicked society of all. And of course, usually when we read that in Sefer Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, we don't think, oh yeah, so Sodom, there must have been a missile barrage that came in and wiped them out, because the surface level setting of that narrative is in a time where we don't have ballistic missiles. And yet, Sodom actually is a society that's, very wrapped up in wars in the region, right? Kedor Laomer and, the War of the Four Kings and the Five Kings, and all of that is a story about Sodom. There's some reason to think maybe that when Sodom was ultimately destroyed, you could argue it's perhaps because Bavel and Kedor Laomer and all of them are back for seconds, so to speak. Um, but we don't have to get into that right now. But I think the point is that uh, if we read the Torah as having prophetic insight, then it isn't totally accidental that there is this association between Sodom and sudden destruction, raining, fiery explosions, esh and gafrit, right? That's even one of the ingredients in gunpowder, like that sort of sulfurous fire. People often think of volcanoes, but it's not a bad description of bombs either. And I think that if you go a little bit deeper, it seems suddenly less coincidental because Sodom is the society that in Eretz Canaan is identified for its stability, its economic security, its Edenic / Egyptian lushness, right? Lot looks towards Sodom and he sees that it's Kegan Hashem, Kulal Mashke, right? It's all watered. Kegan Hashem ke Eretz Mitzrayim. It's well watered like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. And so he's attracted to its economic prosperity and stability. And it is interesting to note that in the present day, although it's the case that classically, in the view of Tanakh, there's a difference between the land of Israel and Egypt in the sense that Egypt is well watered, it has the Nile, it always has a water source, except in very rare circumstances, whereas the land of Israel relies on rain from heaven. And there's much more of the sense of constant dependence on Hashem from one year to the next. In the present day, we still care about rain here, but we are less vulnerable to fluctuations in rainfall. Because we have desalinization, because we have modern technology, there is a lot more that is more Egyptian and more Edenic, and therefore more Sodomite, perhaps, about the economic stability and comfort and security that we have here in Eretz Israel. And that's not unrelated to the fact that we also are a kind of society that when it's threatened by fire explosions raining from the sky, right? Because warfare and the nature of warfare and its connection to technology is all bound up in the kind of same complex of industrialization and hyper technologization that leads you to be able to have clean water all the time, even if it's not raining. And so when you think in those terms, there is a bit of a troubling realization when you start to think from a Kadosh Baruch Hu's perspective, is the fact that fire explosions are raining down in our society, does that mean we're kind of like stone? Like, is there something wrong with what we're doing? I mean, I think people would obviously not want to ask that question because there's no sense in which in the exchange that we just had that it's at all appropriate to say, oh, is Am Yisrael the bad guy here? No, we're not the bad guy. Our enemies are the bad guys. It's good that we defeated them. It's good that we rained 100 or 1,000 times more explosive destruction on them. And that's all a mitzvah. And no one here is questioning that. But at the same time, if you ask what kind of society we are and what kind of society we're running, it is interesting and a troubling way to observe that we are more like Sodom than an ancient Israelite society in the sense that we are less dependent on the rain and more, therefore, like Mitzrayim or more like Sodom. And then we also get a taste of fire explosions raining from the sky in a way that we prefer not to. And it is at least worth looking a little bit more closely at that and saying, is there something to that? Are we meant to therefore realize, oh, we have to fix things. We have to go back to herding sheep and slinging stones. We don't want fighter jets. We don't want desalinization plants. And we'll work it out because, if we do that, then who knows exactly how Kadosh Baruch Hu will help us, but we won't have to worry if we, do right by him. The ballistic missiles will fall short of their target or whatever else, right? There's something overly magical and overly naive on the one hand about that way of resolving it. And on the other hand, it is worth asking the question, are we in any respect that we could fix, not entirely headed down the right path? Because maybe, if we were doing better by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not just that we would succeed in knocking down most of the missiles and succeed in winning in the balance against our enemies, but maybe we wouldn't, have the horrors that we've seen, with all the terrible damage to the home front that we had to sustain in this kind of a war. So I don't think there's a full resolution of that question, but it is interesting to note that as long as we're talking about Sodom, that actually the subject of Sodom is also connected with the subject of David and Biat Mashiach. Now, how is that? Well, because Sodom is the place where Lot lived, and Lot then survived the destruction of Sodom, had incestuous relationships with his daughters, and produced the nations of Ammon and Moab. And Moab is this nation that then gives rise to Ruth HaMoaviyah, Ruth the Moabite, who then converts to Judaism, so to speak. She's the paradigmatic convert. She comes to Yehuda with Naomi, and she marries Boaz, and she becomes part of Am Yisrael, and ultimately David HaMelech is descended from her, right? So David comes from Sodom, in a sense. And that is interesting because he's not the first king of Israel, but he's the first Davidic king, and therefore the king who will identify the place where Hashem wants his name to dwell there. He initiates the process of building the Mikdash. And it is, it can be said of David that he is meant to be some kind of paragon of excellence in how politics are combined with proper relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a way that Shaul was not, right? Shaul failed to combine politics and leadership in battle with proper relationship to Hashem, and that's why he did not have a dynasty and why he's removed from the kingship, as explained in Sefer Shmuel. So the rise of David has to do with that failure in relationship with Hashem, and then David becomes a counterexample where we look at David and he's a warrior and he wins and he fights, but he also has the right attitude, the right speech, the right action, the right relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in many respects. Even though he sometimes fails and he sins, but he does tshuva, that he's the package deal in terms of someone to admire and see as a model for Judaic leadership. So, what does it mean that Sodom has worked its way into the identity of that model for proper political leadership? Right? What does it mean that we are seeing this message from the Torah and the Ark of Tanakh as a whole, that maybe there was something right about what Lot did, and it had to be redeemed over many generations because, at first order it was the mistake, but higher order there was something correct about it maybe, that we have to acknowledge, and that works its way back into the proper development of a polity for Am Yisrael. That's especially pertinent a question because Lot, at some level, is the first moment. He represents the first moment where there's this kind of parting of ways or ideological schism in the project of Avram. Right? Avram comes to Eretz Canaan with this mission from Hashem, and initially Lot is not his son, but he's like his son. He would be the one to kind of pass the baton to at that point because he doesn't have children yet. But then he and Lot can't get along, and Lot goes to Sodom. And giving Lot the best credit possible, you could say that at some level Lot is kind of making a well-intentioned argument by saying, look, if we're going to bring this tremendously important ethical and theological message to the world, it needs to be to a world that has enough calories for people not to just be nose down in the dirt, brutishly fighting each other for the one scrap of food, right? There needs to be enough of an economy to support people having enough capacity for generosity and collaboration, that we can start having expectations of them of how they treat each other, and how they have relationship with Hashem. That's not an unreasonable argument, right? It's very hard to ask a lot of people when they're starving, when they're impoverished, ethically or ritually or whatever else. And on the other hand, Sodom, as the resolution of that, clearly is seen as a mistake, right? Because Sodom is a fundamentally wicked society. Sodom is a society so concerned with its economic security, with its prosperity, with its stability, that it will sacrifice anyone or anything to ensure that. And as a result, it becomes this kind of height of politicized evil that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to wipe off the map. And so Lot, he becomes this example of someone who maybe is well-intentioned, and there's maybe some shred of merit in the argument that he's making, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to throw in with a bunch of Bar-Hayim, with a bunch of wicked people, in order to guarantee that economic security, that is a mistake. And it even is worth saying that, to some degree, the focus on that economic security and that stability will engender that wickedness if it becomes the end-all and be-all, if it becomes the idol of the society, as clearly it did in the case of Sodom. So that's, I think, the first point, is to say, what is the redeemable thread in what Lot is arguing? Even if he made a mistake, how do we redeem what's right about what he's saying? And that's where David comes in, right? David is from Beit Lechem, and he's from Bread House. He's actually from a place that emphasizes this idea of economy and food. And even the story of Ruth and Moabiyah is all about harvesting grain. Like, there's this obsession with productivity of an economic sort, and the need for that productivity. And that carries through all the way to the point where David selects the place for Har Bayit, for the temple that's going to be dedicated to Hashem. And what is it? It's a threshing floor. It's the Goren, the threshing floor of Arwana Yebusi, of Arwana the Jebusite. And so there is this recognition at some level that if you are going to dedicate the nation to Hashem in the right way, you can't do that without an economy, without agriculture, without concern for what happens with material wealth. But you need to do that in the right way that establishes the proper relationship with Hashem, and the temple is the means of doing that, right? So I think that's the first point is just that Lot is correct, but he doesn't have the right toolkit. He doesn't have a way of saying, yes, we need an economy in order to be a society of people who treat each other well, and there's kind of a cooperativity there where if we treat each other well, we actually can have a better economy, et cetera, et cetera. So we have the right idea at one level, and on the other hand, we can't just say, okay, so go where the wealth is and start there because you could be surrounded by the wicked as a result. Instead, what you need to say is there needs to be a way of dedicating our production of wealth to Hashem, and the temple is the means of doing that. And David ultimately becomes the embodiment of that. And I'll say on top of that that one way you can really tell that there's some substance to this point when you look at it through the lens of Torah is that David is from Moab, right? He's, as we said, and interestingly, Moshe Rabbeinu dies in the land of Moab, right? Moshe doesn't get to go into the land, and when he's kind of on the cusp of being able to go into the land and reaches his end, and he dies, it says he's in Arvot Moab. He's in the sort of heights of Moab overlooking the land of Israel west of the Jordan. So what does that mean? What does it mean that Moshe dies in the place where this seed of David comes from? What is that meant to indicate to us? I think it's something very much along the lines of what we've already been saying. Who is Moshe? Moshe, he represents at some level the ultimate example of a leader who says all we need is to rely on Hashem. He so much represents that he leaves Mitzrayim with the people, this breadbasket / slavery factory, right? He takes the people out of there into the Midbar, into the desert. He makes very little provision for their water, for their food, and they rely on Hashem, and they get water from a rock, and they get man mishamayim. They get provided with food and water miraculously. They subsist that way for 40 years in the Midbar. And then Moshe's time is over because when you go into the land and you want to live in the real world, so to speak, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want us to rely miraculously on him. He wants us to do the work. He wants us to farm the land. He wants us to create the prosperity ourselves and then to acknowledge him properly through our relationship with the temple and all the mitzvot of the land that are associated with that and everything else. And so, you see this in many respects. One clear example in the text is that Moshe, at the moment that David Moshe at the moment where Bnei Israel is being chased by Paro, they pass through the sea after the sea splits and the sea drowns Paro, and Moshe sings Shirat Hayam with the people. They sing the song of the sea. There's this pasuk, Amar Oyev Erdof Hasig. The enemy said, I will pursue and I will catch up to them. That's Paro speaking, so to speak. We see that reproduced over in Sefer Tehillim, in a parak where it's David singing, right? And what is it? It's Erdof Oivai Va'asigen. I will pursue my enemy and I will catch up to them. That David is saying, I'm going to go fight the enemy. I'm going to go attack him. So whereas Moshe is talking about the enemy as the pursuer who catches up, and then they're saying, he says to the people, Adonai yilachem lechem va'atem tahrishun. God, the Lord, will fight for you or make war for you, and you can just hold your peace, right? So that's the ultimate, and just trust in Hashem, things will be okay. But then they're not fighting, right? That the people are not fighting the war. Hashem is fighting the war. But David is saying, no, I'm going to fight the war. I'll go fight, and I'll catch up with my enemy, and I'll defeat him, and I'll keep fighting until I eliminate them. But what David is capable of is of doing that and then saying, all credit to Hashem, right? So he doesn't say, Hashem, do this for me. Hashem, save us. He says, I'll save everyone. I'll work as hard as I can to do that. I'll take the risks that are necessary. I'll know that you're with me. Lo yirara ki atay imadi. I won't fear evil because I know you're with me. And then he understands that when he succeeds, that the proper way of talking is to say, this success comes from our Creator. And he's not saying, I'm great and I'm powerful. He acknowledges that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who makes that success possible. And you even can see that, in this archetypal moment of showing who David is, right? He fights Goliath, right? So David goes against Goliath, And what does he bring to fight Goliath? Does he just show up and sort of tie his hands behind his back and say, let the earth swallow you up, as Moshe says to Korach? He doesn't rely on a nes or a miracle of that kind from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He brings a sling, right? And we think of David versus Goliath because we're so inured to that idea. Is Goliath is the powerful one; he's the warrior, and David is the little guy. But there's a miraculous occurrence in a sense where Hakadosh Baruch Hu allows the little guy to defeat the big warrior. But it's more complicated than that. David says before he goes to fight Goliath, "I fought the lion when it took the lamb, and I punched it on its beard, and I freed the lamb from the lion, and I fought the bear." Like he describes himself as a warrior capable of fighting strong, dangerous animals, and he brings a weapon. And not only that, he brings a weapon that we would recognize in the modern day as the better weapon, right? Projectiles that are hard and go very fast in this present day are called bullets. And if David had a gun and Goliath has all his armor and all of his spear and sword and everything else, but David can accurately shoot him in the head with a bullet, which is essentially what happens. You could look at David and just see that he's realized he's smarter and he has a technological advantage that he can use, right? David is showing Tanakh's appreciation of the future of warfare, that ultimately you're not going to win with physical strength where you can swing swords in one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat. On the battlefield, you're going to win by having some ability of slinging really rapid, hard projectiles with accuracy, and then you can take down your enemy much more effectively. So a certain kind of person could come and look at David and what happens, in his fight with Goliath and just say, I don't see a Kadosh Baruch Hu anywhere in this. David was a smart guy who innovated first, had the technological advantage, and he won the battle as a result. And they could look at the present day and say, and that's what we did with Iran. We are smarter, craftier, we have greater technological prowess. We patiently showed restraint for a long time, but when we finally pulled the trigger, they felt the force of all of that difference. And good for us that we developed all of that capability. But that's not the only thing we should say, right? And that's not what David would say. What's interesting about David HaMelech is that he does it himself. In some sense, you can look at everything he does and say he has the technical capability or the physical prowess. He is the one doing the work. But the way he talks about it is, I'm here to fight for Elohim Chaim. I'm here to represent the honor of Hashem. And the whole way through, he's singing psalms about Hashem, be with me. I can't succeed without you. And when I succeed, I will thank you. And I'm doing this in order to sing your praises in public and tell everyone that it's all due to you. Right? So we can look at the current situation and say, maybe there's something comforting when you run all these threads together at the end. You say, all right, fire was raining down on us from the sky and making explosions. And in one sense, maybe there is a little bit of an element there of that happens to you because there's a little bit of stone in your society. But it turns out there was also a little bit of stone, perhaps a crucial bit, in the original model of the Judaic polity, as defined by the Davidic dynasty. And that may not actually be something that we're ultimately supposed to completely reject, because what David represents is we fight our own battles and we make provision and preparation beforehand for how are we going to win and what means will we use to win based on the sort of technical cleverness and whatever other kind of skill and understanding we can develop. But the fact that we do that must not become a blinder to us where we see our success and we say, we did it. We're smart enough. We have the power. There's no one else in this story who's determining events. That we instead are supposed to follow the model of David HaMelech and say, all honor to those who fought and those who succeeded so spectacularly and those who delivered such a crushing blow to our enemy. Thank you to Tzal. Thank you to our leaders who thought and prepared for so long. Thank you to the other security services who played their more clandestine part, but possibly still extremely crucial part. Thank you to everyone in the society who, put shoulder to yoke and supported that effort. And yes, at one level, we did it, and the world should fear us because Hashem has made us very capable of dealing crushing blows to our enemies. But Hashem has made us that capable because we are turning to Him, because we are trusting in Him, because we are saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is for you, this is for the sake of your name, this is in order that we can create the society in Eretz Yisrael that you want us to create here so that we can be an example and a message to the world of the kind that you want us to be. And that I think is the way we have to always work to proceed because there's always the temptation to become infatuated with our own might when we succeed. And there's also something wrong with refusing to acknowledge the importance of our own contribution of effort and ingenuity to the technical aspects of our success. And so you have to strike the balance in the middle and say, how can I think and talk and be and act like David? How can I say, you know what, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let me see if I can do this myself, because I have the motivation from the fact that I'm fighting for your name to try to see if I can make you proud and do it. But I know that really it's hard, that really the odds are against me, that really if I'm going to succeed, it's going to be ultimately because your hand is there beside me fighting with me. And when I succeed, I acknowledge that it's from you, that I need to thank you, that I need to praise you, that I need to dedicate the life and the success that you've given to me and to my society with this victory to magnify your name and the message of your Torah throughout the world.